So we have here Georgia Clarke. Hi, Georgia. Well,
Hi.
she's, as you know, she's the Public Speakers Program Coordinator for Catholic Voices. She lives in London. She recently graduated for a master degree in law ethics and medical ethics in the King's College in London. And she also graduated before, of course, in theology and philosophy in the University of Oxford. And so today she will talk us about the power of storytelling. So welcome, Georgia. How are you?
I'm well. I'm actually coming to you from sunny London. And sunny London, for once, we barely ever get any sun. So I'm currently facing it to sort of get some vitamin D, but I'm also really glad that it's bright in here for once. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I love giving this talk, so we'll have some fun today. I'm going to share my screen so I can share a PowerPoint with you. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Great. Now, I want to say thank you, first of all, for all of you coming onto Zoom on your Saturdays. That's no small feat. I know that lots of you have probably been on Zoom all week anyway. I know that I have. So come on at the weekend. Just thanks so much for your time. I really hope that you get a lot from it, and at least you get a chance to say hello to some other people. I do work for Catholic Voices, and I will tell you a little bit about that in a second. But I wanted to start in the spirit of this talk with a story. When I was younger, I used to be one of the the youngest people at Mass. And so often people would ask me to read one of the readings. And I used to hate it. I hated it so much. I didn't mind it afterwards because people told me what a great job I might have done. But beforehand, I would be sitting in my pew, shaking. I absolutely hated it. And I wouldn't hear anything of the first reading if I was giving the second reading. So it's really a wonder now that I have become the Public Speakers Program Coordinator for a national Catholic Voices. What happened was I was at university and the advertisement came up to train as a public speaker. And given I hated public speaking, I don't know what prompted me, possibly the Holy Spirit, but I thought I should take this on. It's something that if I could grow in, I would really appreciate. So there's an element of public speaking to it, but I'm not the best public speaker. So that's just my first caveat. I know what makes a good one, and that's what I'm hoping to show you today. But the second thing is that why I fell in love with public speaking, why I fell in love with Catholic Voices, was the fact that it's lay-led and it is about stories. It's about the story of your life. It's about the story of Christ, and it's about sharing that with other people in order to empower them. Now, I wanted to explain, I will try, although I haven't done a good job already, at speaking slightly slower for the interpreter from my usual pace. So if you think that I'm speaking quite slowly at times, or I'm pausing more than usual, I'm trying to accommodate for that. And I hope that it means it's an easier job for Lorena, who's doing an excellent job at trying to translate.
Thank you, Georgia.
No problem. Okay. So I thought it would be good to explain a little bit about the history of Catholic Voices before we got going. More than anything, it's because it was started with a story, with a book that changed the face of history, that made people see things in a different way, in a different light. If you could guess what that book was, what would you say? What was the book that inspired? Maybe use the chat function. What was the book that you inspired the foundation of Catholic Voices? Let me check the chat there. The Bible? Question mark. Yes. Well, you'd think it was the Bible. However, it was in fact The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. I don't know if you've read this book, but it changed the way that people interacted with the Catholic Church. it threw things up in the air. Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. And honestly, some people still to this day speak to me as if this book is true, as if the things posited in this book could possibly be reality. When the book was released, I think it was in 2009, 2010, around that time, there was also a huge debate that happened in the UK by some very famous atheists and also 2 representatives from the Catholic Church here in the UK. And it was a complete disaster for the church. Over 100 people at the beginning said that they believed the Catholic Church was a force for good in the world, which was the motion of the debate. And by the end of the debate, over 100 people had changed their mind about that. So the Da Vinci Code plus this huge debate in London meant that the way that people saw the Catholic Church, the way that they saw its force for good in the world, had completely turned upside down. And we know that we're not the only country that that happened to. Pope Benedict then came. I'm sure you know this guy, Pope before Pope Francis. He came to the UK in 2010. So again, very soon around this time. And there were people on the ground who protested him being there. They were holding up signs, ordering his arrest as soon as he came to the UK. That should say heart speaks to heart, but I think it was probably in white and is behind the picture. But the central message he had was heart speaks unto heart from John Henry Newman. And that clearly wasn't a message that got across to many of the protesters or to those who were asking for his arrest when he touched the UK soil. So Catholic Voices was born really as a response to the UK climate towards the Catholic Church. The storytelling that had happened had caused a huge ripple effect to our general population. And Catholic Voices, the founders, saw that there was a need to retell that story. We call that reframing, and that's a different talk. But at the heart of what we do is we train ordinary lay Catholics, people like you and me, to speak actually in the media, so on radio and television, to change the story, to understand really how the media works and lose the fear to be there, because actually there was a lot of fear at the time. And this is understanding the frames. That kind of means understanding the prejudices, the backstory, the way in which people are seeing the church, and step out of them to get a different message across, one of hope, one of true love, which I think is at the heart of the church. And it's a project that's run by lay people, so people like me, Brendan Thompson's our CEO, and it's blessed by the bishops. So what happens is if BBC, Sky News, Al Jazeera, they might call the bishops and say, we want someone to come and speak on this Catholic issue, but we don't want a priest, we don't want the stereotypical, maybe we want a young woman, maybe we want a dad. Do you have anyone who can do that, who's trained? And that's our job. Just check the chat there. Lots in Spanish, and I'm very sorry, but I don't understand it. So I'm hoping that everything's okay at the moment. St. John Henry Newman is really at the heart, that he inspires us every single day. And he was obviously our first English saint for hundreds of years. I was actually lucky enough to work on the canonization in Rome in 2019. And he said, the heart is commonly reached, not through reason, but through imagination. Persons influence us, voices melt us, looks subdue us, deeds inflame us. I'm sure that you can recognize this in your life just as much as St. John Henry Newman noticed hundreds of years ago, or 100 and something, 1890, I think he died. And that's the heart of storytelling. It's reaching people's hearts, not through reason, but through imagination. That doesn't make them any less true. It doesn't make the effect of them any less real. That's something that I'll come back to again and again. And therefore, the power of storytelling is really, it's just such an effective tool, both for effective public speaking, but also effective evangelization and effective professional life. And that's why I think that it's such a good tool for you in your group building bridges. I heard from Catherine and from Trini that your mission is to be a global network of young professionals that help to raise up your professional, cultural, and human training. And so I thought, we'll sit with this for a little bit. I want to try and understand, excuse me, I want to try to understand what you mean by raising up your human training. Wow. No wonder you're up on a Saturday morning on Zoom. If this is your mission, that's a great, lofty height to reach. That you care enough about who you are. You care enough about the audience you're reaching, their humanity, that you wish to develop further. Anybody can do professional training, but not everyone can do cultural and human training. And it's why the power of storytelling will help you in your mission so much, and why it's helped me in mine. So lots of things that we've been doing with Catholic Voices, we've recognized that three things. If you're talking about development, three areas need to be covered. So the first one is knowledge. You need to develop your knowledge all the time. Do your homework. The second one is developing your skills. And the third one is developing your attitude. Jose's raised his hand. I'm hoping everything's okay. If not, stick it in the chat function. And so here's where I'm possibly sticking in your mission statement into what I'm talking about here. I think knowledge of who you are, this is your human development. Every time I think about a new story, I learn something more about myself and more about humanity more generally. Because stories convey messages I can't even reason out loud, but I kind of get it. The skills part, I think, is definitely where your professional development will come in. And thirdly, attitudes, that's more of the cultural development, the cultural training that's going to look different from wherever you are. And I'm so glad that we're an international audience today, because I'm hoping that when I run through the principles of civil communication, which are from Catholic Voices, they will help you in whichever culture you're trying to communicate your story to. So that's why my talk has been structured in such a way. First of all, I'm going to be talking a bit about the knowledge. What do you need to know about storytelling? Why is it effective? That's why I'll run through the science behind it. The skills then will be the how. How do I tell stories? When are they appropriate? When should I employ them? What skills do I need to be able to be a great storyteller? And thirdly, the attitudes, that kind of development is who you are trying to convey in your stories and who you are trying to reach. Because good storytellers know who they are communicating rather than what. As I said before, Catholic Voices have come up with a method called reframing. So that's one part of our training. We've also developed these 10 principles of civil communication. We want to remind people whenever they go into the media, whenever they're in a boardroom, that these principles should be at the heart of any communication that we make. First ones, don't get mad, reframe. Shed light, not heat. Think in threes. People won't remember what you said, but how you made them feel. Show, don't tell. Remember to say yes. Compassion counts. Avoid robotics. It's about witnessing, not winning. And finally, it's not about you. And the principles of civil communication can be a separate talk in themselves, but the power of storytelling gets to the heart of number 4 and 5. That's why I've underlined them. People won't remember what you said, but how you made them feel. That's nearly always the case, I must say. Think back to an incredible meeting you were in, or an incredible conversation you had. You might remember 1 or 2 lines, 1 or 2 things, basic bullet points that person said. But when you remember the meeting, when you remember the conversation, what you're spurred on by is how you were feeling during that time. What was it that made you feel that way? And the show, don't tell. Training in itself is effective, but not nearly as effective as when you tell stories throughout it. When you know your audience, you know how to encourage your audience, inspire your audience, motivate your audience. So show, don't tell. The power of storytelling is getting to 2 of the things at the heart of Catholic Voices training. Now, I do have to let you know that a lot of the stuff I'm telling you is from David J.P. Phillips's TED Talk, The Magical Science of Storytelling. So a lot of the stuff about the cocktails and some of the statistics, I've shamelessly borrowed from him because it's such a good talk, and I would recommend that you go and watch it. I've also put my own spin on it, so hopefully you can be more encouraged and it's a bit more applicable to your organization. But let's talk about the knowledge part, the science of storytelling. This is why we tell stories. There are 2 types of cocktails. 2 types of cocktails that usually any of us are running on at any one time. The first cocktail, its ingredients are dopamine, and the effect of this first ingredient is focus, motivation, and an increase of memory. Focus, motivation, and increased memory. Now, if I have your permission to increase your own dopamine levels, I'd like to do that right now. As Trini said at the beginning of this talk, I studied at Oxford University, and it was a great achievement to get in. I was really proud not only to have passed the interviews, but to survive the 3 years there. They weren't the best 3 years ever. It was pretty hard work. But I always think back that it might not have happened. And this is why. During my interviews, I was staying in one college, but all my interviews were at a different college. And it was I didn't know this, but on a different side of the city. And I was sat there in the common room thinking, gosh, it's only 10 minutes until my interviews. I was rereading my notes. We were only 18 at the time. So imagine I was so nervous, overcome with a kind of heart palpitations, breathing heavily, also trying to calm myself down and being rational. How can I best tackle this interview? I really had no idea. So I then went up to one of the stewards and said, hi, my interview's at Oriel in 10 minutes, just to let you know, no one's called me forward. And she looks at me and says, grab your coat. We need to go now. So I just grabbed my coat, grabbed my bag. We left the college, and she just starts sprinting across the city Actually, little did I know, Oriel College was about a 25-minute walk away from where I was. And it's a bit of it's quite difficult, that college. They're a bit more traditional. So we were sprinting across the city, and I arrive. I'm arriving with 3 minutes late, which I know that they won't like very much. And I'm panting, my palms are sweating, and I'm reaching towards the door. And little did I know that that interview was going to be one of the toughest hours of my life, and that the interviewers didn't go easy on me. So I reach for the handle and I pull it down, and it swings open. It's a big oak door. I walk through, and there's a carpet. It was so overwhelmingly beautiful that I felt so out of place. I felt like I had imposter syndrome. My heart starts it feels like it's almost shutting down. And as I walk in, my feet almost not touching the floor. The interviewer says to me, now I don't know if you'd find it annoying if I didn't tell you what the interviewer said, but I'm not going to tell you, simply for the fact that I hope dopamine levels have been increased in you right now. I hope that you feel that your focus has increased, your motivation increased slightly, and usually with stories, you remember them. And all storytelling has an element of dopamine. You don't have to have a cliffhanger ending, because you're always waiting for the next thing. Okay, what's the next ingredient? The next ingredient is oxytocin. And an effect of this is an increase of bonding with your speaker. It's feel a greater sense of generosity, and they trust you more. One way of, another story then, I guess, of explaining what oxytocin can do for us is the following. When I did my confirmation, so, we're Catholic Voices, so I'm Catholic, and when I was 14 or 15, I didn't have any faith, really. I might an Our Father once every week, but I didn't go to a Catholic school, and my family don't practice the faith. But my grandmother asked me if I would consider doing my confirmation. So I said yes. I didn't know what it was. I decided to just give it a go. And one day I went to the retreat for the confirmation group. I really didn't know what to expect, but I went along anyway. And we went to a little island just south of England called the Isle of Wight. Now, there is nothing about that day that would have made me enjoy it the way that I did. But we walked along the beach, and a friend of mine brought his guitar, and I was singing with him, and he was playing. We went to meet the nuns at the convent of St. Cecilia's. Again, I feel like that should have freaked me out. They were behind bars. But I came back from that day, I think, on reflection, having experienced the Holy Spirit for the first time. It wasn't anything hugely revelational. I just got back in the car, and my grandmother picked me up. She just looked at me and she said, "You're glowing. You're glowing." And I had the best day. Today has been the best day. And looking back, there was no reason for me to have had such a good day. We really didn't do anything that exciting. But God worked in me in a way that I can never explain. I could not have predicted. The catechists couldn't have known. And it was from that moment on that faith became the most important part of my life. And I'm here now, working for Catholic Voices, telling this story to you. And I give thanks to God for that. Perhaps you've had a similar moment in your life. I was in adoration just this morning, and I remember explaining it to Jesus. I was trying to explain it to myself with Jesus, thinking it's almost like sugar, the feeling of the Holy Spirit. It gives you a small buzz. It gives me energy. It reminds me of who I am. That's all the things I have when I also eat sugar. I wanted to share that part of my life with you. Part of my conversion was just a simple day on the Isle of Wight. The final cocktail are endorphins. And what endorphins do, they make you feel relaxed and more creative and definitely more energized. And I've got a little video to show you of when someone gets a bit of an overdose of endorphins.
Oh, shoot. We're gonna go. Okay. You got him? So come up here and hold these.
That's why we have a happy and joyful wedding.
That's classic. Just didn't grab the ring. This is where we die. That's all right. So.
Edward,
Take this ring
take this ring.
as a sign of my love and fidelity.
The sign of my
Hey, come on. Come on.
In the
Okay.
name of the Father,
in the name of the Father
and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
and Holy Spirit.
Great.
I hope that's given you a bit of a giggle as well. But essentially, that was a real poor timing of when endorphins really kick in. So it's the stories that make people laugh. So that was the first cocktail. A lot of really great effects from the increase of different hormones there. There's also another one, cocktail number 2, if you like. And the first ingredient is cortisol. This increases irritability, stress, and poor creativity. I've been quite stressed at work this past week. There's been a lot of things on. And there was one day in particular, I'm sure all of you have had this, but it seems that your inbox is always full. It feels like everybody wants to call you, text you about like the most meaningless things. And they get upset if you don't respond in good time. And it was just piling on and on and on. And the day felt like it was going on forever and ever, but also going by like this. The ambulance that's now driving past is illustrating this point quite well, I think. So my day was already just so full. There were so many things happening. There was just one meeting after another meeting after another meeting, had a talk here and a talk there. And then the safeguarding lead runs into the office and just says, Georgia, they've been calling you all day. They've been calling you and you need to do this training for safeguarding. And I just, cortisol increases stress. It was just a day. I just told a very brief story about one day this week. I'm totally fine. But as you can imagine, and I'm sure you've had days like this yourself, yes, I was a bit more irritable that day and I wasn't as creative as I normally am. The other one is adrenaline. Adrenaline's great, but it can also make us restless. This is when we stay up at night. It can also make us quite anxious. And yes, there is an element that we do feel more energized. So an example of this second cocktail is probably something like, ah! Sorry. Sorry. It does, it stresses us out. Now, when you go into a board meeting, whenever you go to a family dinner, which cocktail do you think most people are running off more? Because most of the time it's that second cocktail. But storytelling can really increase that first one. And I wanted to give an example of a great public speaker who uses a story to illustrate his point, and it gives you an idea of how it can be used so effectively.
Darren Tay, outsmart, outlast. Darren, outsmart, outlast, Darren Tay.
All the best.
Hey, loser, how do you like your new school uniform? I think it looks great on you. Those were the words of my high school bully, Greg Umberfield. Now, if you're all wondering whether the underwear that Greg used was clean, I had the same question. Mr. Contest Chair, fellow Toastmasters, and anyone, including those watching worldwide, if you are looking at Calvin Klein here, stop staring. My eyes are up here. And this was what Greg told me. He said the best way to deal with inner bullies is not to run or hide. You cannot run away from the bully here. The best way to deal with it is to stand firm, face it, and acknowledge its presence. When you do so, you are no longer identifying with it. You are stepping out and observing it. It's like instead of being out there in the storm, you're now in the house watching the storm. Your inner bully will weaken and fade. I was thinking, wow, that's profound. How come you didn't tell me when I was 14? My friends, I'm standing on stage now before 2,000 of you and many more watching worldwide. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm in control because I'm acknowledging it. I'm stepping out of it, observing it, and watching it weaken and fade. My friends, let us all not run away from our inner bullies anymore. Let us all face our inner bullies, acknowledge its presence, and fight. Let us all be vulnerable together as a family, supporting one another. Because we can all outsmart and Mr. Toastmaster.
I hope you got to see a little bit about why great public speakers employ the use of storytelling and usually very personal stories within a lot of their presentations. And it's no wonder, really, because storytelling has completely changed the way that we interact digitally. This is a photo taken in 2005. And I want to again use the chat function. When do you think this was? Where is it? What do you think is happening? Pope Benedict. It's in Rome, correct? So it's at St. Peter's in Rome, in the Vatican, yes. John Paul II has just died. Correct, Aurora, thank you so much. Yes, I don't know if anyone else can see that because it's direct messaged me. John Paul II has just died. And so it's the inauguration of who? The new Pope, who became Pope in 2005. Pope Benedict XVI, that's right. So 2005. The next picture I'm going to show you is only 8 years later. And it's the inauguration of who? Pope Francis. Yeah. So in the space of 8 years, the same, well, similar kind of event looked completely different because of the introduction of mobile phones, of tablets, screens. And what people have realized is that actually our attention spans have decreased quite a lot. And we're actually very used to seeing stories a lot of the time. One way of showing this is looking at the Oxford English Dictionary words of the year. In 2013, the word of the year was hashtag. Hashtag. In 2015, the Oxford English Dictionary word of the year was the laughing emoji. And in 2016, the word of the year was post-truth. I was also thinking about what hashtag the laughing emoji and post-truth even mean. And the thing is, we look sometimes at the laughing emoji and we remember laughing at jokes, we remember laughing at stories, laughing at each other. The emoji itself contains within it a story. So does hashtag. We know when we look at a hashtag, we're thinking, okay, what's trending? Social media. You probably have particular words in your head right now. And then post-truth means something about there's always more than simple factual rational statements. I'm not sure we really live in a post-truth era, even though most people would like to think we do. But it's encapsulating what a lot of us, the journey that so many of us have gone on. We do live in a world full of stories. And storytelling generates about $10.5 billion every year. And JP Phillips, in that TED talk I referenced earlier, he told this story of how in 2009, a guy called Rob Walker bought 200 items from eBay. He wanted to see how effective storytelling really was. And so each item he bought for approximately $1 each. And he spent a total of $129. He then went and contacted 200 authors, and he asked them each to write a story for each of these objects. What happened to this object? They were asked to be as creative as possible. He then went to sell the items on eBay with the stories attached to them. And though he'd bought these items for $129, his total sales were $8,000. One object sold for $62.95, even though it was only bought for 99 cents. Stories change the game. How many times have you said, but I want it to mean something to me? Whether that was a piece of artwork, a piece of jewelry, maybe an engagement ring, a tattoo, anything. There have been times when I think, oh, I will buy this, but I do want it to mean something to me. So we attach a story to it. JP Phillips argued that actually people were being tricked, that their emotional investment through storytelling was tricking them, allowing them to do away with anything rational, to do away with their observations. I don't know if that's true. Okay, yes, we might be less rational, but that doesn't mean that the meaning contained within stories is less true or less real. The visuals that you produce within any of the stories I've told you already, those visuals are processed within your brain 60,000 times faster than text alone. So maybe the next time you're in a meeting, you'll remember this. You'll remember to tell more stories, to engage sort of visual imagination of your audience as well. Because, and this is now going on to a bit more of the skills part of this talk. It's you emotionally investing in your audience in some way, but also asking for their emotional investment too. And storytelling speaks of who we are. It speaks of who we are. And the greatest emotional investment that any of us can make is falling in love. Anyone ever fallen in love before? What a great story falling in love is. I fell in love with my faith, for example, when I was 15 on the Isle of Wight. But it's the best investment that I've ever made. And what happens when we invest is we feel less alone, less isolated, and we come together as an audience. It's why we love the cinema, the movies. Somehow we leave feeling more human and not less. Because what we do when we tell a story, or when we even listen to a story, is we give something of ourselves. We give our hearts in some way. That's our attitude. When we tell stories, share yourself in some way. Be vulnerable. It's not always very nice. But actually the results are connection, greater creativity, bonding and trust and generosity and all those things that I talked about before. And who was the greatest storyteller? He who taught in parables, the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the lost son. You guessed it. This is a picture taken from The Chosen, which if you haven't watched, you really must. It's amazing. Of course, it was Jesus Christ himself. And what was he telling through all of these parables? What's the parable of the lost sheep about? What was that story about? It's not just a nice story. The parable of the lost coin, what was that about? The parable of the lost son, who goes away to spend his inheritance, then realizes he has nothing left and thinks, I should go back to my father. And the moment that he starts walking towards his father's house, his father runs out to greet him. What's that about? Here's Jesus with Simon Peter, Matthew, Mary Magdalene. What are those stories about? Well, John 3:16, a Bible verse I'm sure we all know quite well. That God so loved the world that he gave his only son so that everyone who believes in him may not perish but may have eternal life. That's what the parables are about. The parable that he would tear down the temple and then restore it in 3 days. What is that about? That no one has greater love than this and to lay down one's life. It was also about Jesus telling us that when he says, the Father and I are one, that he is the good shepherd looking out for those lost sheep. He was a great storyteller. That didn't mean that the content of his stories was any less true. And who got this other than St. Paul or many of the other saints, all the saints? That St. Paul tells us, really, what was the message behind the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son? Other than that nothing can separate us. Nothing in all creation. Not even the powers of hell. No power in the sky above or in the earth below. Indeed, nothing can separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus. But Jesus didn't say necessarily all this. He told stories, and his whole life was one, each revealing deeper truth than we could ever have heard from words. So how now to become a great storyteller? Well, good news is that you don't have to be a certain type of person or have certain characteristics. You don't need to be a great entertainer to be the entertainer type on the Myers-Briggs test. Your life and your stories all are worthwhile, all can create this sense of what it means to be a great storyteller. But do write them down, maybe talk about them at the end of the day with your families. A gratitude journal might help, where you just say thank you to God for whatever's happened that day. Remember that it's less about you and more about your audience. What hormone levels do you want to affect in your audience? That sounds kind of like manipulation, but actually it just means that you're helping them to get the most out of a particular time. So it's not about which stories you want to tell, but which ones do your audience need to hear. There are 4 I's of storytelling. So whenever you think about a story, think, does it include all 4 of these? Does it spark an interest in your audience? Is there an element of instruction? What am I teaching without saying the words? Involve your audience. Say to them, you've probably felt this way, or you might have been in a similar situation. And finally, inspire. Because God is writing the most incredible story with your life. And no one else will go through what you've been through. Not in the same way, not with the same people involved, not in the same circumstances. So inspire people so that when they go through what they go through, they can do it with some kind of hope, with an excitement, knowing that it's all okay, that it's great to be human. John Paul II, in his address to Catholic educators, he said, "To teach means not only to impart what we know, but also to reveal who we are by living what we believe. It is this latter lesson which tends to last the longest." That's what storytelling does. If you're wondering which stories to tell a story about you. Reveal who you are. Be vulnerable. And live it. You can't just tell the stories and live completely differently. If God has effected a change in your life, if you've had a great breakthrough in your professional career, live it out in all aspects. You are growing, you are changing. These stories are part of a tapestry of your life which looks beautiful to God our Father who loves you, but also to other people who admire and are inspired by beauty. Just to explain a little bit, I'll stop sharing here, but just to explain a little bit about how stories can help in a professional context, I was in a meeting regarding safeguarding training, so looking after children and vulnerable adults. And one of the other adults in this meeting said, we should come in to run a session on kind of the power of storytelling, but also telling the stories of survivors. Because when people come in for training, no matter how much goodwill in the world they have, if the training lasts an hour and all they leave feeling is overwhelmed, and they've had no motivation at the start to put that training into place, that training is wasted. So let's go in, let's tell their stories, because only by listening first are we able to speak, because to speak is to serve, and a call to speak is a call to listen. So listen to one another's stories, tell your own, be inspired by them, And I hope that today you've seen a little bit about what the power of storytelling can be in your own life.
Oh, thank you, Georgia, for your presentation about the storytelling and all the tips that you're sharing us. And well, now if anyone want to make a question, you can write as I told you before. You can write them here in the chat, or you can raise your hand. I don't know if anyone want to ask something.
Yes, I have a question,
Yeah.
Georgia. Yes, you have to tell us the end of the story of the interview, the Oxford interview.
Yeah. What happened with the finally?
Yeah, so they said to me, you may take off your jacket. And I was like, this is a very different type of interview than the one I had before, who were like, come in, have some tea. So, and then the very first question, they didn't smile, they just stared at me. And then the very first question was, can you explain the difference between misleading, deceiving, and lying?
Well,
Just straight faced. I was thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. But thankfully, I got in, but not to that college.
Okay, nice.
Hi, Georgia. Thank you very much for your talk. Thank you for sharing all these amazing tips and information. I have a question. I would like to hear from you. How can I express my convictions in an attractive and concrete manner?
That's a great question. Oh, I guess it would depend what convictions they are and in what context.
Yes, as a Catholic woman, my faith, because I guess most of the things that we believe in are not very attractive for the world in general.
Yeah, that's a great question. That principle of civil communication that I talked about before can be quite helpful. So people don't always remember what you say, but how you made them feel. So last principle number 10, it's not about you. So the first thing is to approach other people like they are the most important person in the world. And actually how they feel leaving this conversation is going to be more important than anything that you say. So that's one thing. You don't have to be the best defender of the faith, but actually to relate to them in some way, I found quite helpful. So it's a case of, I totally get what you mean about that. So I've had to wrap my head around it. Put yourselves on the same playing field in whatever way that feels natural to you. Smile and live your life like it gives you joy and like your faith gives you joy, because people see that and it's infectious. And so my other job is as a youth minister at my local parish. So I work on a national basis with Catholic Voices, and then I have another job where I work as a youth minister, and I've been also doing sort of young adult formation. And time again, it's almost just predictable that they'll say, I saw somebody and I wanted what they had. I listened to them and I listened to the way that they loved their faith. They listened to the way that they loved what they believed, and I wanted what they had. So I wanted to find out more. Even if they thought that the content of it was so unattractive and they thought the content was so backwards, but the way you deliver it, just say, look, I know it doesn't make a lot of sense and I've brought it to prayer a million times. And don't be preachy, right? So there's another one of them, which is avoid robotics. So we all know what it's like to hear someone say, well, in the Bible it says, and in the catechism number, and actually, did you know that statistically speaking, this many marriages fail because of... Everybody shuts off at that point, don't they? So just be normal, just be yourself is my encouragement, and live with an infectious joy, which actually, to be honest with you, Heidi, only comes from prayer. So in my job as a youth minister, I was talking to my spiritual director once, especially one week when I was feeling really burnt out. And she said to me, Georgia, we often use this really poor phrase of we need to give ourselves, pour ourselves out in our work. And as a minister, you'll do that a lot. And she said, the problem is that you should never be pouring yourself out. You should always be holding everything about you for God and pouring Christ out. She was like, think about the burning bush, for example. The burning bush was on fire, but it wasn't consumed. So if there's something in you that's burning, it's of something other than God. If it's being consumed. And I think I was definitely like pouring myself out in some way, but they don't need that. They don't need me, they need him. So that was one way that was helpful to understand. So definitely root yourself in a lot of silence and prayer, and then just say, wherever I am, whatever I do, may I do it with a smile on my face. That's from you.
Wow, thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgia. Well, here we have another question from Nkechi Asogwa. Sorry, I don't know if I pronounced it properly. She says, thanks, Georgia, for this great session. Can you shed more light on the principle of not being robotics?
Yeah. It's just a case of being hard of heart and not putting yourself in the things that you say. So if you're always giving statistics, if you're quoting from the Bible, if you're quoting the catechism, you're always giving other people, and there's a place for that, but you're always giving people almost hard things. Whereas it's when you give yourself that other people can see your own brilliance, but also your own brokenness. And it's that's inspiring. It's that makes the kind of, what's the word? The other words, the other teachings, the doctrines, it's that helps it make sense. So I guess that's why I say avoid robotics. If I ask someone a question, I don't want them to tell me what the recent statistics are on it. That can be your second or third point, but start with something more human, more real. Like a story. Whenever I have to do a defense of abortion, I'm sorry to bring that sort of topic up, but people expect me to talk about, this is the number of women who regret it, or this is the number of people who've been born, and actually that's not even a good defense of why we're against abortion. But I did work for a pregnancy center for a year. I went to the houses where we looked after the women there, and I could tell their stories for them because I asked them theirs, and they just said to me, so many of these women, I didn't want an abortion, but I had no choice, was essentially at the heart of everything that they said. So I never understood the pro-choice argument, because every woman who I thought was in a position to have one and didn't want one, and they're the women I think we ought to care for because they've been backed into a corner. They felt like they didn't have one. And then I got to meet their little babies who were there only there because we had a pregnancy center looking after them. Are there any more questions?
Yes, okay. I think that the question was very well answered because Nieti was raising her hand. So here's another question. Elizabeth, I don't know if she's over there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hi. Well, I'm gonna read it, or you want to ask yourself?
Trini, go ahead, read it, because I don't know. Just read it, it's good.
Well, okay, thank you. How did you react? Did this happen to you when somebody asked you before cameras something where you didn't know the answer, or where you weren't sure which reaction would be the wisest? And how did you react?
Well, yeah, first of all, we don't always get it right, do we? Sometimes you just get it really wrong, and then we learn from it, which is fine. the other thing is, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. That's something I'm actually going to go away and look up, and then follow up with that person if you can. If it's in a media interview, you can't. But if it's, say it's on a personal basis and someone says, but why does the church believe this? And you think, I don't know why I'm being expected to be a walking catechism, but actually just saying, it's a really good question. I totally see where that's come from. I've thought the same thing myself at times, but you're right, I actually haven't looked that up. I'm going to do that. Let's talk about it next week. That can be quite helpful, just honesty. In a media interview, actually, when I've watched media interviews where the interviewee is genuinely saying, I'm not sure about that, but you return to your main 3 points. So the third principle of civil communication is think in threes. So whenever we go into the media or go into anything, we have 3 main points to make. And they're always positive, whatever stories you tell, they serve your 3 points, or they serve the main through line. And if you can't answer a question in the media, we'll always go back to one of your points. So like, actually, that's a really good point. I'm not entirely sure what the teaching is on that, but what I would reinforce is, and then you go back to your one of your 3 points.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, I have a last question. From Angela Suarez.
Mm-hmm.
Does storytelling works as well in the one-on-one talks as it does with larger audience?
As in a conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that what you mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it does, personally. And you know what? I think for women, it works better than ever giving advice, because nobody wants to be given advice, really. I don't know if you're like super humble and are able to listen to people giving you advice when you're struggling with something, but that's not me. But my friend texted me the other day, for example, and she said, can I just vocalize something I'm struggling with? So I said, sure, go for it. So she like reeled off all these things about, I feel like I've got one foot in of everything, but nobody sees me as a leader. Nobody wants to involve me fully. I'm also struggling in this friendship because she makes everything a competition. And there were a few things, right, in what probably felt really overwhelming. So first of all, in any kind of counseling training or listening training that you might have, and I definitely recommend you get some as part of your professional and skills training and development, is always to acknowledge feelings and just to acknowledge how that person's coming to you. So you don't want to just say, oh, wow, that's a lot. You want to say, that sounds really overwhelming. And I've been in that position too. So first of all, just acknowledging feelings. And then I decided to tell a story because I'd definitely been in that position before, and I learned from it little things, not totally, but I'd learned a little bit from it. And what I did was tell the story about what I did on the back of that. And she was like, oh my gosh, this is so divine. I was like, okay, I don't think it is. But actually, it's just what storytelling helps us to do. It helps us to break down boundaries. And you stop feeling like you're the only one who's ever felt it or gone through it. So I'd said something like, when I was studying, I also felt this way. Because actually studying was my big thing, was my main thing. I threw that myself into that. And all the other things, all the other projects I was part of, I couldn't give myself totally or fully. I couldn't be at everything because I also had to study. And sometimes, yeah, people went to other people for things that I felt like I could have done, and it sucked. But you do have to give yourself fully while you're studying. And that's what God's tasked you with. That's your duty of today. And she was like, oh, actually, that's very true. Because she worked so hard to get into uni. So I had to remind her of that, really. But if I just said that part and not given the story about what I'd been through, I think it would have been different. Anyway, let me stop rambling on.
Okay, so I think this is the last question because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because Georgia has another talk. So Marilupe, do you want to ask?
Yes, thank you. Georgia, first of all, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to listen to you. And So I have this deal going on. So when you tell a story, of course, we're Catholic and we're really, we have faith and everything. But sometimes in this time and with this society, it's hard to, as I think Heidi said, how to, it's not like I want to hide my faith, of course, but which one is the line between you have to understand your audience, right? And if you know your audience is not Catholic, or yeah, it's not Catholic or not really practicant, how can you, like, I don't know, when we start talking and start, I don't know, for me it escapes me. I don't know, I don't know how to explain, like, God is the most important thing in my life, right? So when I talk, of course I will say something about God or Jesus or my faith, and then I in my brain is like, no, Marlupe, you have to build bridges, not like start like, yes, Jesus loves you and whatever. It's not like I am like that, but it's really hard. What can you tell us, like how to do it, and how to, it's like valid to show your faith sometimes, or it's more like the human way and not, and talking about a spiritual, and I don't know, it's hard. Sometimes it's really hard. I was convinced before and I didn't care at all, and I talked to God and whatever, but now I understand that for some people can be like really like, no, wait, you said God, come on, bye. So it's hard.
Yeah, it is. And actually when Jesus said a lot of that, they also said bye. They did. And thousands of them left him. So be encouraged is the first thing I'd say. Second thing is, when we go into the media, we're creating a glossary of words. So we don't say, if I said certain terminology that you didn't understand, you would have switched off for approximately the next 5 or 6 seconds. So if I'd said, this encyclical, blah, 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 you hadn't heard about it, your brain just kind of goes, irrelevant information, don't know about that. So when we're talking to our friends who don't know about the Catholic faith, and we say things like, oh, Mass, sacraments, Eucharist, Mary, Mother of God, and they're like, huh? It also makes them just really disconnect, because they don't know what you're going on about, first of all. And you're also assuming a start line that's like 50 meters down the track than where they're at. So one tool we use here in the UK is Alpha for evangelization. And what I found really interesting, I'm not saying definitely use a tool like that, but what I found interesting being part of it was the fact that I had to listen to what their questions actually were. And then when I did a catechism series for the people who were thinking about converting, we had a dinner, we had wine, all the things you would like to do ordinarily. Okay, what do you want to know? And they were like, I just can't. I'd be a Catholic tomorrow, but I don't get angels and demons whatsoever. And I thought, I would never have thought of that as a question or to put on a catechism course. So, okay, week 1, angels and demons. Week 2, what are we doing? And actually listening to what the things were that was stopping them was helpful. And there's other things where I'm like, yeah, don't be too in your face about it, because you don't like that when other people are like that with you, probably. So, yeah, sorry, Aurora, keep chatting. You definitely leave. Have a nice time. Thank you for coming. I would just say be yourself, don't be preachy, and try and meet people where they're at, because that's what Jesus did. That's what God does with us all the time. So if you feel like you're compromising, it's probably not so much.